Hello, hello, hello! Welcome back to another archaeogastronomical adventure. I'm Thomas Dinas, your host, and this is the Delicious Legacy Podcast. So good to see you here again, my ravenous archaeogastronomers. On today's short episode, we are going to go back to ancient Greece, but at the same time explore a very topical theme: food in the ancient Olympic Games. What did the athletes eat? And the judges? And the coaches and gymnasts? And what about the audience? And what did the athletes eat if they wanted to cheat? What was the etiquette, so to speak, and the hunger and the regime for sportsmen 2,500 years ago in ancient Greece? All that and more fascinating and tantalizing delicious details on the episode coming up. Sit back, relax and enjoy. With the arrival of the Paris Olympic Games this year, I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity to explore a little bit about what happened to the ancient Greek Olympics and, of course, explore a bit of the history behind it, find myths and find legends of the era, and, of course, how people explained the supernatural power of some of the champions of the time. And of course, correct some misconceptions and find out some truth behind the myth of the Olympic Games. Anyway, unsurprisingly, what we know is that the ancient Olympic Games were founded in 776 BCE. That seems to be the agreed upon date. Much of the early writing on athletics was written during the classical period of Greece, so hundreds and hundreds of years after the first Olympic Games. And these texts obviously have a mix of legend, myths, and facts that they were all kind of put together from the contemporary writers of the time to create the Greek identity of the time. So once this information was established as fact, like the 776 BC, numbers were assigned to the games, and the date 776 would have been the first Olympiad number 1. In general, and in the basis and the core of the Olympic Games, the ancient games in Greece, these were a religious festival to honor the gods. Same or similar with other Pan-Hellenic games such as in Nemea and in Delphi, and similar, of course, to the Panathinaik Games, which only included Athens. Stories from the Olympics and the names and descriptions of well-known ancient athletes, along with their training regime and the dietary rituals, are perhaps some of the fascinating and interesting texts that they survive from the day, and that's the subject of our episode today. That will be the core of our episode. Some of the ancient Greek Olympiads. So basically, an Olympiad was the period between two Olympic Games. So that 4 years, and that was kind of the way, the chronology, the way the ancient Greeks measured the passing of time. So they're saying, so and so happened in the year 3 of Olympiad number 16 or something like that. And in any case, the ancient Greek Olympic Games included things like pankration, pentathlon, wrestling, boxing, javelin, and equestrian events. What we know is that the pentathlon, which became an Olympic sport with the addition of wrestling in 708 BC, included running, jumping, throwing discus basically, and javelin. And basically, we're not clear who won. You didn't have to win all 5 of them to become a champion. But we think whoever won the most, or there was some kind of the judges would decide who was the winner anyway. Then obviously you had the running contests, which included the stayed race, which was basically the stadium. You had a 200-meter foot race on the main track of the Olympia, and obviously the faster won. The Diavlos, which was 2 stages, so 400 meters foot race, and Dolijos, which was ranging between 7 and 24 stage, which is where we get our word stadium from. Stade was the original 200-meter track in Olympia, as I said just a moment ago. The discus was made originally from stone and later iron, lead or bronze. And the technique was very similar to how we throw the disc today, the freestyle discus throw today. Boxing, obviously, kind of similar to how we box, I suppose, but the boxer's hand, they weren't protected. Rather, they were wrapped and strapped with himandes, which is the straps. And the hands basically. So to strengthen the wrists and steady their fingers. And initially these were soft straps, but as time progressed, boxers started using hard leather straps to inflict as much pain and disfigurement in the opponent's face. Pankration was a primitive form of martial arts, combining wrestling and boxing, and was considered to be one of the toughest sports, obviously. And marrying the myth here, the Greeks believed that it was founded by Theseus when he defeated the fierce Minotaur in the labyrinth. And it was a very brutal, full-contact combat sport. Virtually had no rules, except with the rule that there was no biting and no eye gouging. Those two things were prohibited. There's a skiphos, which is a 2-handled deep wine cup, painted and decorated beautifully, obviously, which shows a trainer closely supervising this life-threatening competition, which it is, I believe, this particular one is in the Met Museum in New York. There was a famous fighter from the city of Sicyon called Sostratos, who was known as Fingertips, which sounds kind of sweet and cute, but he was known like this because he would break his opponent's fingers at the start of a match, and so he would win, basically. For jumping, athletes used stone or lead weights called altiers to increase the distance of a jump. They held onto the weight until the end of the flight and then jettisoned them backwards, which is kind of interesting way of working. Of course, another main event was the chariot races in Greece and in the Olympic Games. And of course, in ancient Greece, only the wealthy could afford to maintain a chariot, 4 horses, and a charioteer and train them all year long. So it was a very prestigious honor if you won the Olympic Games in chariot racing. The races took place in an arena we call hippodrome, and the most dangerous place for that was the turning post, where the chariot wheels would lock together, and there were obviously many crashes, and it was a big spectacle. It was a very awesome sport for spectators. And of course, there was also horse racing, and this was also hazardous because the track was already churned up, and the jockeys rode without stirrups or saddles, as it's the modern way. These weren't invented back then. And so the winning horse and its owner were given an enthusiastic reception, and riderless horses that came first past the post were also honored as well. According to myth, many Greek gods and heroes competed in the first games at the Olympia. Hence, obviously, it was a sacred place for the gods. And here, worth saying that Olympia is in Peloponnese, in south of Greece. Nothing to do with Mountain Olympus, which is up far north in Greece, the tallest mountain in the Greek world today, anyway. So yeah, the gods competed in the first games. Zeus wrestled his father Kronos for the throne. Apollo outran Hermes and beat Ares at boxing. And Heracles in Greek, often credited with the founding of the Olympic Games. And he won victories in wrestling and pankration. So here perhaps is the place to start our story of the Olympic Games, and some weird, gruesome recipe as well. Pelops is considered to be the like the inspiration, the father, the person who started the Olympic Games. Pelops was a mythical figure, of course. Perhaps had some association with real rulers of the past. But Pelops is the person who Peloponnese, this massive land in southern Greece, has been named from. And he was the founder of the Pelopid dynasty. And he was supposed to be the grandson of Zeus. His father, and you might know this name, was Tantalus. So Tantalus, being the son of Zeus, from a mortal mother of course, and welcomed to Zeus' table, and also being a king, I think he grew a little bit too arrogant and cocky. And then one day, he decided to offer to the 12 gods of Mount Olympus to come around his place for dinner. Talking about extravagant dinners with important guests, eh? My wife sometimes doesn't let me have 6 guests, let alone 12 gods. Anyway, basically, he said, okay, I'm gonna test the gods in his arrogance. He wanted to test them for their omniscience and see if they know everything and so on. So what did he do? He killed his son Pelops, he chopped him up, and he cooked him in a stew, presumably with onions and garlic and cabbage and honey and wine and olive oil. And basically he served this Pelops stew to the gods to test them, to see if they will find anything. Obviously, the gods are gods. They knew what he was up to. None of them ate. None of them touched the dinner plates. Only Demeter, the goddess of harvest, ate some, because she was completely absent-minded. She was distraught by the loss of her daughter, Persephone, to Hades. So she absent-mindedly ate some of the boy's shoulder. Obviously, the gods were extremely angry with Tantalus, especially Zeus. So he ordered Clotho, one of the 3 Fates, to revive the boy again, to bring it to life. So they collected all the body parts, they put them in a sacred cauldron and boiled them, and they're building the boy that was alive, with the exception, obviously, of the piece that Demeter ate, the shoulder. And so that was made by ivory from the god Hephaestus. Presumably, Demeter, being so absent-minded and grief-stricken by the loss of her daughter Persephone, she hasn't thought about the taste of the stew and what Pelops tasted like. So we will never know what human flesh tastes like, I suppose. I guess it's a lot like pork, but that's my guess, and don't take my word for it. Obviously, Tantalus was punished for his act. His punishment was to go to Tartarus, the deepest portion of the underworld, and there he was supposed to stand in a pool of water beneath a fruit tree with low-hanging branches. So whenever he reached for the fruit, the branches raised, and his intended meal was away from his grasp. Whenever he bent down to get some drink when he was thirsty, the water receded before he could get any. Thus, this is the true origin of the word tantalizing we use today. So Tantalus, he killed and chopped and cooked his son, Pelops, in a stew. And this is basically sometimes how I feel with some of my family and friends and colleagues, but I don't cook them and serve them to gods or other sacred guests. I restrain myself. But yeah, I think I feel Tantalus a little bit. Of course, this has to do very little, even the tenuous connection with Olympia and Olympic Games. But anyway, regardless, since Pelops was the father of, was the inspiration for the Olympic Games, that he was cooked and eaten, I think it has significance to the Olympic food story. Another story related is that obviously, and that's where the myths and the legends interconnect, and the layers upon layers of them over the centuries and from different people. So Pelops now, grandson of Zeus, as we said, he was also the favorite of the god Poseidon. So god Poseidon gave him, as a present, a chariot with some amazing horses. And he was roaming around Earth, and he was in the area where we call Elis today in modern Peloponnese, near Olympia. And he fell in love there with the daughter of the king Inomaus, the king of Pisa, in Elis. So basically, he wanted her hand. The daughter was called Hippodamia or Hippodamia in English. And King Inomaus, being a bit protective for his daughter and perhaps a bit incestuous in love with his daughter, he refused. And he was always refusing to give the hand of his daughter to any challenger. Supposedly he killed the previous 13 suitors, and he had their heads upon a spike around the palace in the town. And so he challenged Pelops to a chariot race. And remember, Pelops had a chariot from god Poseidon, but also King Inomaus had a very good horses as well, gift from of his father, the god Ares. And so basically he could win all the other races against common mortals. So what happened here is that Pelops, he bribed Inomaus. He bribed Inomaus' charioteer, Myrtilus, and Myrtilus removed the linchpins from the chariot. And when they raced on the track, basically the Inomaus' chariot disintegrated, and Inomaus was killed. And hence Pelops won, and he became the king of Pisa, and he married Hippodamia. And Pelops thus became the ruler of this great part of the Peloponnese. And that, according to legends, his shrine at Olympia was established by Heracles, and it was of special importance. I'll be back after this short break. Okay, now that we sorted some of the myths of the origins of the Olympic Games and the first, however tenuous, link of food with the Olympic Games, let's check what happened in reality in ancient Olympia. And that's where all the people descended every 4 years for the Games. So you had about 50,000 spectators, according to some estimates, in the classical period, or in the apex of the Olympic Games, perhaps on the 2nd century BCE, or even later, perhaps. And so you have the athletes, and you have the trainers and the slaves, and then you have the judges, and so I guess there were thousands upon thousands of people descending down to Olympia, staying there for a week or so. And a few days before the Games, you had the Games. In the middle of the Games, you had sacrifice to Zeus, and there was a feast, and of course, a few days after the Games. So what was happening there? What did people eat? How did they survive all this time there? And there are some interesting stuff that we know, but it's how can I put it? Tantalizing evidence of what they ate, or how they trained the athletes. So the earliest Greek athlete of whose special diet we are told anything is Hermes of Sparta, who is said to have trained on dried figs. So he was the winner of the 200-meter race at the Ancient Olympics of 668 BC. Pausanias, one of the great Greco-Roman writers and historians of the later Roman period, so around the 2nd century AD, has an account that a meat diet was introduced in the middle of the 5th century by someone called Dromeus of Stymphalos, he was an ex-long distance runner. And on another account, it was that Eurymenes of Samos consumed a meat diet recommended by his trainer, Pythagoras of Croton, which seems to be the philosopher to me, but others disagree as well. He had a trainer, he was called Pythagoras, and he recommended a meat diet. Now, the most legendary and the most, and perhaps the best account of athletic diet to survive from antiquity is going to Milo of Croton, a wrestler. So basically, he did indeed seem like the Obelix of the cartoons, of the modern day cartoons, of the goals. And he was a wrestler whose feats of strength became legendary. He was an outstanding figure in the history of Greek athletics, and he won the wrestling event at 5 successive Olympics, from 532 to 516 BCE. And according to Athenaeus and Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century AD, so pretty much 600 years after the event, his diet was 9 kilograms of meat, 9 kilograms of bread, and 8.5 liters or 18 pints of wine a day. Talking about appetite, that's amazing. Again, in Athenaeus, there is another case of an athlete who was known to have surpassed all men of his time in strength because he was nourished in goat's flesh. And similarly, Galen acknowledged the drawbacks of pork meat compared to kid meat, in that it is dyspeptic because it contains fatty and glutinous substances. However, for wrestlers and boxers in particular, these qualities of pork, which was difficult to corrupt while not easily dispersed, are anything but undesirable, since they have the capacity to sustain the athletes in exceptionally prolonged sessions of training or contesting. Athletes take very wholesome foods, but the heavyweights among them especially take foods that are fatty and glutinous, since their whole preparation is with a view to contest, in which sometimes they must wrestle all day long. And for this reason, they also need food which is both difficult to corrupt and not easily dispersed. Although there was a boxing champion named Melanchomas of Caria, who went down in history for his unique fighting technique, which basically he managed to defeat his opponents without ever dealing a single blow or ever having hit himself. Because of his exceptional condition and endurance, he was able to hold up his arms in defense until the opponent eventually became exhausted and submitted. So in a sense, it was about endurance and stamina, not strength. So I don't know what he ate. Sadly, we don't know. So Galen, this giant of medical figure from the late Roman period, describes the experiments he conducted among heavyweight athletes to reach the conclusion that pork meat is the most nutritious of all foods. And Galen's experiment, in contemporary terms, would qualify as a controlled feeding trial. He checked the validity of these observations both in teenagers under training and in men engaging in strenuous manual work, and found the same test of the statement in the case of youths being worked hard in the wrestling school and in people carrying out any forceful and energetic activity whatsoever, like that of ditch diggers. So the perceived quality of meat was also dependent on other factors as well, such as the age of the animal. Another medical writer, Oribasius, claims that while the meat of recently weaned ruminants should be the prime choice, meat from older but still young animals can still be useful to active people, such as resistant athletes, who have good digestion. He makes a distinction between resistant athletes and racers, whose primary concern is not strength but endurance. When considering quality of meat, the diet of the animal was also taken into account. Therefore, pigs that lived in forests and subsisted on kernels and acorns are better for the athlete than those reared on a home diet. Oribasius also commented on the suitability of fish, the typical complement option to the grain-based diet of his era, claiming that those who train regularly should take care to include fish and other nutritious foodstuffs in the diet. In addition to fish, cheese was also complementary food widely used by the Greeks. Mentions of cheese and dairy in regards to the athlete's diets are generally rare in ancient medical texts. There's only one such mention we find in Dioscurides for unsalted fresh cheese as a food capable of promoting the growth of one body mass. Philostratus, the author of the only surviving Greek book devoted wholly to athletics, casts an interesting light on those popular idols of his day, the star performers, the professionals in the stadium. In contrast to everybody else, he regards them effeminate and puts the responsibility on doctors who have imposed on athletes a dietary system more suited to convalescents. And he says medical science introduced elegant cooks and dietitians who turned athletes to finicky gluttons. They fed them on soft cakes sprinkled with poppy seed. These medical trainers, he tells us, argued endlessly about the kind of fish suitable for the charges, saying that those from muddy water were fat, those which fed near cliffs were soft, deep sea ones meaty, those that fed on seaweed were thin, those which ate green slime were tasteless. They insisted on the merits of pork in the training diet, but demanded that the pigs should not be pastured near the sea or river, because their flesh might be contaminated by the garlic and crabs, which they could eat, but that they should be fed on cornel berries and acorns. In considering this evidence, we must bear in mind that Philostratus disliked the athletics of his own time and looked back to an earlier period as the golden age of sport. It is possible, too, that in talk of this kind, the trainers were acting as publicity agents for the charges, and that we should regard this gossip about athletes' diet as the equivalent of modern tittle-tattle about the domestic habits of famous actors and actresses. Of course, food didn't only exist as a sustenance for the ancient Olympians, but we know that a lot of them cheated one way or another. So performance-enhancing food was perhaps part and parcel of the menu. So doping could have been widespread in the ancient world if existed. Obviously, the athletes had oaths and laws and rules, and there were vigilant officials, and there was the religious setting of the games and so on. But it doesn't mean that they didn't cheat one way or another. And one of these ways was to eat and drink something that will make you better, give you an edge over the rest of the competitors. And ancient Greeks were extremely competitive, and obviously they were very creative in their competitiveness. One way was with curses and curse tablets and jinxing athletes with curse tablets, which is obviously one way to do things. And I'm pretty sure I've heard modern iterations of this same way. Another 1st century ancient Greek physician, Aretaeus of Cappadocia, a 1st century ancient Greek physician, once opined on the purportedly salubrious effects of ingestion of testosterone, let's say. His words were something like this: "For it is semen, when possessed of vitality, which makes us to be men, hot, well braced in limbs, well voiced, spirited, strong to think and act. But if any man be continent in the emission of semen, he is bold, daring, and strong as wild beasts, as is proven from such of the athlete as are continent. Vital semen, then, contributes to health, strength, courage, and generation." Galen, again our friend here, is said to have prescribed the rear hooves of an Abyssinian ass, ground up, boiled in oil, and flavored with rose hips and rose petals, basically as a performative enhancing tonic. There's a recipe for you. Not sure if this performance enhancing tonic was proven to help the athletes, or it was just the sheer terror of drinking such a concoction that made people run faster. During the Olympian Games of the 3rd century BCE, athletes attempted to boost their performance using mushrooms. So Philostratus reports that doctors were significantly helpful in athletes' preparation for the games, while cooks prepared bread with analgesic properties. In the 1st century AD, Greek runners consumed a herbal beverage to help them be at peak performance during endurance events. So there you have it. There was doping in Ancient Olympia, in Ancient Olympic Games. But the point was not to be caught, and everybody was doing it. And obviously if you cheating was not allowed, obviously. And if you caught, it was big shame. And in the entranceway of the Olympic Stadium in Olympia, there was lines of bronze life-size statues of Zeus. These saints were placed there not for honor of the great athletes, but to punish in perpetuity athletes who violated Olympic rules. So cheats were banished for life from competing in the games, and inscribed on each pedestal it was the offending athlete's name, his transgression, such as bribing an opponent, and the names of the family members. So the statues also served as a warning to athletes of the day who had to pass them on their way into the stadium to compete before the 40 or 50,000 spectators. So partying was important in the ancient Olympic Games. In modern Olympic Games, we see, especially now with constant media access, internet, social media, and so on, in the 21st century, we have a lot of sex and partying and drinking of athletes in the Olympic Village. In the ancient Olympic Games in Greece, games were the same thing. There was also an excuse for party. Some athletes would let loose and living it up large. Philostratos reports the stupidity of a trainer who slavishly followed this sequence and forced the wrestler Gerenos from Naucratis to train, even though he felt unwell after having spent a boozy night celebrating his Olympic victory. The athlete eventually collapsed and died. But partying was even more so of a prominent thing between the spectators. It was 5 days of partying, basically. Symposia would turn to drunken orgies. Central part of the games was a huge sacrifice to Zeus, the patron deity of the sanctuary. Of course, that was happening. The sacrifice was happening in the middle of the third day, and was timed to coincide with the full moon. The Eleans, so the people who run the games from the town of Elis nearby, they always arranged the sacrifice of at least 100 cows. So with the sacrifice, there was a huge messy barbecue and a mountain of bones and ash. So obviously the spectators being there in Olympia, and you had the Olympic truce, so you made it safely there, walking or taking your donkey from all over the ancient Greek world. Could be from Massalia in France to the Black Sea to the Minor Asia, Egypt, Naucratis, as we said, and anywhere in between. You stay there for the whole 5 days of the games at least, and maybe a bit more after and before. And the place became a bustling bazaar with friends and family and the associates of the sportsmen and the athletes of the day, eating, drinking, gossiping, and doing business together. In old Olympia, often there was no free-flowing water at all during the drought-ridden summer months when the games were carried over. And this means there was a lot of wine. And whatever water was available probably wasn't drinkable. It wasn't potable. So wine, high heat, low hydration, made for a massive risk for heat stroke among the visitors. Obviously, many of them lived now out in the open as well, and swarms of black flies and other bugs infesting those microbe-laden latrines brought on epidemics of gastroenteritis and diarrhea, and often that was fatal too. Ancient Greeks did not have to be familiar with the germ theory of disease to know that these bugs were bad, and so before every Olympic festival, local priests sacrificed at the altar of Zeus to Apomius, the averter of flies. And there you have it, food in the ancient Olympic Games. Lots of meat, lots of wine, some bread, some dried figs, lots of doping and cheating, and lots of partying. Well, some things never change, do they? We are human after all, and this is it, our little episode about food and drink in the ancient Olympic Games. Thanks for listening. Remember, if you want to help the podcast, please subscribe on Acast, Patreon, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, follow the channel on YouTube, and leave a review wherever you can. Especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify helps promote the podcast to more people. Let me know your thoughts. Get in touch wherever you can. Especially you can email me at the Delicious Legacy Podcast deliciousllegacy@gmail.com, and I'm on Twitter as The Delicious Legacy and Instagram. So yeah, wherever you want, if you have a question or a suggestion or something that you know that I don't about a specific subject, do let me know. This was the Delicious Legacy podcast, and see you soon for another archaeogastronomical adventure.